Whether you're off to uni for the first time this year or you've been there for a while, let's dive into everything you need to know about student finance in 2024-25. Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. It's Tom here again from Save the Student, and in this video we're going to be looking at what funding is available from student finance in 2024-25. We're going to be looking at how to apply, what the repayments are like, plus any extra funding that's available outside of student finance that you might be eligible for. Plus, we're going to break everything down by each country so you know exactly what's on offer for you. And don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss another video like this. So we'll start off by generally looking at what funding is available across the UK. But what's really important to know is that the funding body that you apply to is based on where you normally live and not where your university is. So let's say that you're a student who normally lives in England, but you're going to go study at the University of Edinburgh. You'd still apply to the student finance body in England, not in Scotland. No matter where you're from in the UK, you will be able to get at least some money towards your tuition fees and your living costs, but how much you get and whether that comes as a loan or a grant depends on a whole range of factors, including your household income, where you normally live, and where you'll be studying. But where you live outside of term time is a really big one, because that decides which of the 4 countries you're getting your student finance from and what's even on offer to you in the first place. So it's really worth knowing whether you're going to be applying to Student Finance England, Student Finance Northern Ireland, Student Awards Agency Scotland, or Student Finance Wales. In terms of eligibility criteria, it is worth noting that there are a few other things that you might need to fulfill in order to get the full student finance package, but I don't want to go into too much detail on it right now because we do go through it in a lot more detail on our website. That said, I will give you a very quick overview of what the types of criteria are, just so you have a flavour of what to expect. So first up, you have your course, and there are about 10 different types of courses that are eligible for funding. There's also rules around your uni, so wherever you're studying needs to be a recognised institution. Your age, so you can get a tuition fee loan at any age, but to get a maintenance loan, you're going to have to be under 60 or 61. And then there's your nationality and residency status, which is probably the most complicated of all of them. But in short, you basically need to be a UK citizen or have settled status, and you need to have lived here for at least 3 years. Some exceptions are made for people who don't satisfy the traditional criteria. So we're talking about refugees, for example. But as I say, that is probably the most complicated of all of them. And we do go into more detail on that and the other eligibility criteria in our guide on the website, which we've linked to in the description below. But what I will say is, if you're about to finish school and you've lived in the UK all your life, don't worry, you will probably be eligible for the normal student finance package. So the first part of the student finance package that we're going to go through is the tuition fee loan, which is a part of your student loan that goes towards your university education. But tuition fees do vary across the UK, and the exact amount you're charged will depend on where you're from and where you're studying. So let's take a look at how much the maximum tuition fees are across the UK. And it's worth knowing that although I say maximum, in reality, almost all universities do charge whatever the maximum amount is. So if you're from England or Wales, tuition fees will be £9,250 a year wherever you study in the UK. If you're from Northern Ireland, it will be £4,750 if you study in Northern Ireland, or £9,250 everywhere else. And likewise, if you're from Scotland, it'll actually be free if you study in your home country, but £9,250 a year everywhere else. The good news though is that no matter where you're from or where you're studying, as long as you meet all the usual eligibility criteria, you should be eligible for a tuition fee loan that covers your cost of your tuition in full. And don't worry if you're stressed about the idea of £9,000+ landing in your bank account, making sure you don't spend it, or making sure that you make the payment. Student finance will pay that money directly to your university, so it's never in your account. You do not have to worry about it. Moving on to the maintenance loan and grants, and this is the part of your student loan that covers your living costs whilst you're at university. Although, spoiler alert, as we're going to cover in a bit more detail later on, it probably won't be enough to cover the costs in full. Again, assuming you meet all of the usual eligibility criteria, you should be able to get at least some money in the form of a maintenance loan and or a maintenance grant, but exactly what you'll get will vary depending on a whole range of factors, including your household income, where you live, where you're studying, and perhaps most importantly, which student finance body you're applying to. There are some basic rules though that do apply across each of the student finance bodies. So first of all, when we talk about household income, this is usually the income of the parent or the guardians that you live with. But crucially, this does include step parents, and it doesn't include any parents that you don't live with. And where this results in you receiving less money than the maximum maintenance loan, that's because the government expects your parents to make up whatever the difference is between the amount that you've received and the maximum loan on offer. And to help you figure out exactly how much that is, we do have a calculator on the website that we've linked to in the description below. Oh, and just a note to say that if parental income isn't really an appropriate measure to decide what your household income is, so perhaps you're a mature student, maybe you're estranged, maybe you're a care leaver, other measures can and will be used to decide how big a maintenance loan you get. And finally, the amounts that we're about to go through are for non-final year full-time students. So when you're in your final year of university, the amount you get in your final term is slightly less than you'd get in previous years, and part-time students get different funding completely. So do check out the guide in the description of this video that goes through everything you need to know about part-time student funding. So now we've covered all of that, let's go through the maintenance loan allowances country by country. And remember that whilst all the information we're about to share is correct at the time of filming, there is a chance that it could change by the time you go to university. So do check out the maintenance loan guide that we've linked to in the description of this video for the most up-to-date information. Oh, and there's really no need for you to sit through the information for the countries where you're not from. So feel free to use these times to skip to the part that's most relevant to you and then go to the next section on bursaries, grants and scholarships. We'll start off with England, where there are no grants as part of the standard maintenance package. So all of the support that you receive will be added to your student loan debt. So if we look at the amounts on offer in 2024-25, you can see that the maximum loan on offer varies pretty significantly depending on where you'll be living while you're studying. So that's whether you're living at home, living away from home and outside London, or living away from home and in London. So if your household income is £25,000 or less, you will get the maximum amount on offer for a student in your living situation. And that's £8,610 if you're living at home whilst you're at university, £10,227 if you'll be living away from home and outside London, and £13,348 if you'll be living away from home and in London whilst you're studying. But if your household income is more than £25,000 a year, you will get less than the maximum loan, and this is on a sliding scale, so the exact amount that you get will depend on your exact household income. But that said, in this table we have gone through some example amounts. So let's look, for instance, at a household income of £35,000 a year. With that, you'll get about £7,160 if you're living at home, just over £8,760 if you're living away from home and outside London, and almost £11,900 if you're away from home and in London. Then, once your household income is above the maximum income threshold for a student with your living situation, you'll then receive the minimum loan only. And that's just under £3,800 for students living at home, just under £4,800 for students living away from home and outside London, and just under £6,650 for students living away from home and in London. In Northern Ireland, the government offers both grants and loans as part of the standard maintenance funding. So the loan will be added to your student loan debt, but the grants will not have to be repaid. So the amounts on offer will vary depending on whether you're living at home while studying, living away from home and outside London, or living away from home and in London. So you can see that if you'll be living with your parents, you can get a maximum of £6,610 a year if your household income is £19,203 or less. But you can see that just over half of that comes in the form of a grant, and then the higher your household income is, the lower the grant you'll get and the bigger the loan you have to take out. Although it is worth noting that the overall level of funding that you'll get will still be lower than those students from the lowest income households. Now, once your household income is £41,540 or above, you're now no longer entitled to a grant, and all of your funding will come as a form of a loan. And then once your household income is above the maximum household income threshold, you'll receive the minimum loan, which for students living at home is £3,938. Now, these same principles do apply to students living away from home and in London, just with different total amounts of support and different amounts of loan and grant. So away from home and outside London, the maximum amount on offer is £8,136, and that includes a grant of £3,475, and the minimum amount on offer is £5,084, all of which comes as a loan. And then if you'll be living in London, the maximum amount you can get is £10,852, again with that £3,475 grant, and the minimum amount on offer is £7,121, all of which comes as a loan. In Scotland, maintenance funding comes in both the form of a loan and a bursary, so the loan will be added to your overall student debt, whereas the bursary will not need to be repaid. Now, Scotland is the only part of the UK where the amount of maintenance funding that you're entitled to does not vary depending on where your university is. As you can see, the only factor that affects it is your household income. And another key difference is that while elsewhere in the UK, the amount that you receive will depend on your exact household income, in Scotland it's actually just done in bands, so there are only really 4 different amounts of money that you can receive. It's also worth knowing that this year, all students have seen their entitlements increase by £2,400 thanks to a new loan that's been introduced by the Scottish Government. So with that, the maximum amount on offer is now £11,400, and that's paid to students with a household income below £21,000 a year, £2,000 of this is a bursary. And as you can see, the total level of funding decreases as you go through the bands, first with the bursary slowly reducing to £0 and then the loan reducing too. So the minimum amount on offer is £8,400, all of which comes as a loan, and that's for students with a household income of £34,000 and above. Now, I should point out that these are the funding levels for what's known as young students. So if you're over 25 or meet one of a few other criteria like having a child, you may be classified as an independent student, in which case the funding levels are very slightly different. In Wales, the government offers loans and grants as part of the standard maintenance package. So you have the loan that will need to be repaid and the grant that won't be. But one really important thing to know about the maintenance system in Wales is that your household income will not affect the size of the maintenance package that you get. All it does is determine the split between the loan and the grant. And what that means is that all students with the same living situation have the exact same amount of money land in their bank account. So here's an example of how that actually works. So you can see here that the amounts on offer to students living at home while studying is £10,315. And that's no matter what their household income is. But you can see that the lower your household income is, the more of your funding that comes as a non-repayable grant. And this balance slowly shifts as the household income increases. But then even once you exceed the maximum household income threshold, you'll still get £1,000 of your funding as a grant. And again, this same system applies across each living situation. So if you're living away from home and outside London, you'll get £12,150, again with the split between the loan and the grant varying depending on your household income. And if you're away from home and in London, you'll get £15,170, again with at least £1,000 of that coming in the form of a grant. So now that we've gone through the maintenance funding, we have some good news and some bad news. So the bad news is that, as we kind of touched upon earlier, the amount that you'll get from maintenance funding is often not enough to cover your living costs in full whilst you're at university. That said, the good news is that there is still more funding out there that you can apply for. So we're talking bursaries, grants and scholarships, and in terms of the ones that you can apply for as part of your student finance application, again, it will vary from country to country, but there are a fair few out there. So you could be looking at a special support grant, for instance, if you're on housing or income support. There are travel grants if you need to travel abroad or to a clinical placement as part of your course. There's disabled students allowances, or DSA, which is for if you have a physical or mental condition which impacts your ability to study. And there are childcare and dependence grants too, so that's if you're financially responsible for a child or an adult. In some cases, that extra funding can be worth over £25,000 a year, so it is definitely worth taking a look at our guide to grants on our website, which we've linked to in the description below. But do remember that beyond student finance, there are also other organisations that fund bursaries, grants and scholarships. So we could be talking about your university, it could be a business, it could be a charity, whoever it is, and even if it takes you 2 or 3 hours to find it, it's absolutely worth doing, because at the end of it, you could end up with £1,000 or £2,000 extra in your bank account. In terms of applying for student finance, one really important thing to know is that you can change your circumstances later on. So don't worry if you're not sure if you're going to get into your first choice uni or whether you'll live at home or not. You can change your application later on at any time. It's also super important that you get your application in before the deadline, because that's the only way to make sure that you get your loan on time when you start university. If you do it any later than that, you might find that you end up waiting a few days or even a few weeks for your student finance to arrive in your bank account. The deadlines for applying for student finance do vary depending on which part of the UK you're from, but also whether or not you're a new student. Now, at the time of filming this video, the exact deadlines haven't been published, but we will be able to tell you roughly when it can be based on previous years. So in England, the deadline for new students is usually around mid-May, and it's usually around mid to late June for returning students. In Northern Ireland, it's usually early April for new students and the end of June for returning students. In Scotland, new and returning students usually have the same application deadline, which is usually at the end of June. And in Wales, new students typically have their deadline around late May, whereas for returning students it's at the end of June. The application process itself can all be done online or by post if you'd prefer, and you will need to have a few documents to hand when you do it. So that could be an in-date passport or information about your parents' or guardians' household income. But again, I don't want to go into too much detail on that right now, so do check out our guide to applying for student finance, which you've linked to in the description below. And finally, I thought it would be worth looking at how you'll end up repaying a student loan, although again, I don't really want to go into too much detail on this because it's easily big enough to be its own video. And actually, if you do want us to do one explaining how student loan repayments work, just let us know in the comments below. But I do want to go through some of the main points, and while the exact details, as ever, do vary depending on which part of the UK you got your funding from, the main principles are the same across all of the systems. So first up, you don't start repaying a student loan until you've reached the 1st April after your graduation, and even then, you don't start repaying until you're earning above the repayment threshold, which varies across the UK, but also by when you started university. Then you repay 9% of whatever you're earning above above that repayment threshold, and you stop repaying altogether if your salary ever falls below that mark. So really what that means is the size of your debt has absolutely no impact on the amount you repay on a monthly basis, and that's only affected by how much you earn. There's also a repayment window of 30 to 40 years, and if you haven't repaid your student loan in full by the time this deadline arrives, whatever amount is remaining, no matter how much or how little you have repaid, the remaining amount will be wiped. As I say though, there is a lot more detail to it than that, so please do check out our guide to student loan repayments on our website. We've linked to it below. In there you'll be able to find out what student loan repayment plan you're on, what the thresholds are, what the interest rates are, how much you can expect to repay each month. But if you do take just one thing away from this video, it's that student loan repayments do not operate like other loan repayments. In many ways, they do operate more like a tax. So what you borrow isn't necessarily what you'll end up repaying. So there you go. Those are all of the main things you need to know about student finance in 2024-25. But as I say, there's loads more detail about all of them in the guides on our website that we've linked to below. So give those a read, get your application in on time, and don't forget to like and subscribe for loads more stuff like this.